Can you hear me? Yes. Welcome, everyone. My name is Masih. I am the Vice Chairman of NASIM. For those of you who are not familiar, we are a mainly student-driven association, and we organize events such as this one to kind of broaden and nuance the view of the Middle East, the wider MENA region, and its peoples, and how we look at it here in Denmark. The Turban Times is a Middle East magazine with the objective of kind of showing the Middle East as we don't know it. So those two are very alike. Today we have an event about the so-called far left in Israel, sometimes called the radical left. With us tonight we have three Denmark-based and kind of Danish as well, Israelis, born and raised in Israel and live now in Denmark, to kind of share their personal stories with us. And we have Anne Esther Bukris, who is the leader of the Copenhagen Jewish Film Festival and is a lot of things, a lot of interesting things, and she will be presenting herself now. We have a schedule here. It's kind of flexible, but we'll see how the night goes. We also have a short break if you need that. So, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Anna.
Thank you, Masih. I think you should give Masih a great hand for doing all these, giving us these opportunities to meet, crossing borders, crossing minds, develop new mindsets maybe together, and this is actually the reason why I said yes to moderate this. I'm not left or right. I suppose I'm just a human being completely obsessed with tolerance and human rights. And also, of course, as Masih mentioned, the director of the Jewish Film Festival for more than almost 20 years. Very old. And also, I was a researcher at Roskilde University, and today I'm a partner of a small NGO. It's called Center for Art and Interculture, and we work with art for social change, and we do that project-based. And also, of course, just to mention, why am I so interested in this specific topic? I grew up in a mixed marriage, Israeli father, a Danish mother, so if you have identity questions, this is the reason why I'm here, I suppose. For that reason, I'm also very concerned about change and how we can create change together. And also, I discovered recently that young people, even mid-age people, even older people, they don't mix up with political parties anymore. They don't vote for political parties because they don't find themselves represented. Rather, they choose activism. So I'm very interested in this idea about activism. So let me take the attention away from Masih and me and welcome the three of you. Amazing to have three Israeli-born activists at Copenhagen University this rainy, cold, windy day. Jonathan, welcome. Jonathan Ophir, would you like just to mention a few words about yourself and say welcome to the audience?
Okay, welcome. Yeah, good to be here, thank you. I was born in Israel, in fact on a kibbutz in central Israel, and lived there more or less for my first 20 years, and moved to Denmark in 1995 when I was 23. Simply met a Danish woman, who's my ex-wife. Okay. No, I'm 45 now. So, so I've been living here for 22 years, and really I entered more the political arena maybe from around 2007, I would say, having read more critical history about Israel and Palestine.
Okay, listen up. I'm the moderator. Tamara?
Yeah, so, okay, you hear me. So,
What is your name?
My name is Tamara, and I was born in Israel in a town called Tivon, between Haifa and Nazareth, almost 40 years ago. And I moved here almost 4 years ago because I met my husband Luna. And I was an activist about 10 years before like an activist in the Palestinian struggle, about 10 years before. And I still am some visits, not so much lately, but generally.
Tamara, I forgot to say your last name, but can you pronounce it? Holtkena?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Holkeno is my
Holkeno.
last name. I was
Okay.
born as Tamara Aronson, and I changed it to Tamara Holkeno after I moved here. Holkeno is Umer's last name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mixing on cultures and names. Barit Bal, will you introduce yourself and welcome?
Yeah, I hope it's working.
Do you hear well? Do you hear well? Backseat? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm Parit and I'm 28 and born and raised in Tel Aviv. And yeah, I moved here 4 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago, just because I wanted to be here. And actually started doing activism here. I mean, I had my opinions when I was still in Israel, but I was not so involved. Just my brain was involved. So here I became more active.
So, we decided for some questions for this wonderful panel. We already discussed many directions, and I'm sure that you also collected a few questions. But let us start out, Masih, with a small cut from Masih. He had a great experience with the Israeli Social TV, which is an activist, NGO, journalist, live article organization. And we would like just to introduce to their work, and from there we will do step into the panel.
Maybe I should give some context. This is a video from last year from al-Khair, a Palestinian village in the West Bank. This is a video about Jewish Israeli activists and diaspora Jewish activists coming to al-Khair to kind of support the Palestinians living under the military regime. And here we see the consequences of that. So these activists are considered by many in Israel being a part of this so-called far left, the so-called radical left, yeah.
Here in al-Khair, we face a demolition. It's an annual demolition. Every year we face 3 or 5 demolitions here. And all of the houses in my community got the demolition orders, and we are waiting. And every day in the morning we are just check the near roads to see if the bulldozers come to demolish or not. Yes, we got 9-time demolition in my village. Every demolition 6 to 7 houses, and this makes the life horrible, and we are suffering from this a lot. And we hope one day to arrive to live without a demolition, to live in peace in my village.
I think it's very important to accompany these people in their struggle to survive under a military regime, to create a situation where they can stay in their homes and stay on their land and resist the terrible apartheid regime that is happening here.
So today we're invited to Macher by the residents here on International Human Rights Day. It's a day that's celebrated all over the world as a celebration of human dignity and the rights of all people to housing, infrastructure, and education. Here in Macher and throughout the occupied territories, the human rights of residents are not respected. They've been denied the right to housing, education, and other essential resources. And we're here working with them to cultivate the land, which so often they can't without interference from settlers and from the military.
Even just over the past 4 months, there's been 3 demolitions here. And the Israeli army is basically trying, and not really even slowly, quite quickly, are trying to push out the Palestinians of Area C in the South Hebron Hills, which is where Macher is situated. If you were to look over the mountain right now, Macher is under a settlement called Carmel, and you can really feel how, if you're living in the South Hebron Hills as a Palestinian, you are constantly surrounded by the Israeli occupation. And as an Israeli, and also as a Jewish person, and as a human being, it's important for me to come and stand with the residents of Macher and say, I don't believe in this, I don't stand for this, and I will fight for you.
The presence of Jewish and international activists in Macher shouldn't be necessary. Ideally, one day, people from all over the world will come to Macher to visit, to meet the wonderful families here, to experience the warmth and the hospitality and the kindness and generosity. But that's not the case today. Today, we need to have Jewish and international activists on the ground in Macher to support the work that family members here do to defend themselves, to advocate for themselves. The people of Macher have lived in this spot since the 50s and are still denied access to the most basic facilities, the most basic services and amenities. The people of Carmel, since the day they set foot here, were taken care of because the government sees them as human beings worthy of care. All it takes is looking around in Macher to understand that the government of Israel has no such goodwill towards the residents here.
That was very enlightening. A small piece of information from a tough world, I suppose. We all agree. So I would like to invite you to talk a little bit about your point of departure, your activism, your most... I ask you what's more important for you than anything else in the work that you do. And we talked actually recently, just half an hour ago, a little bit about the difference between the peace movement and the activism that you are dealing with. Jonathan, would you like to introduce just, your standpoint and what's more important for you and what's the burning platform for you?
Okay.
Yeah.
When I was introducing myself, at the point where I stopped, it was to say that in 2007, I simply picked up a book which happened to be Ilan Pappes' The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which he wrote in 2006, so it was a new book, which caused a certain earthquake, I would say, in that it simply provided a grand narrative about what was going on in Palestine, which was ethnic cleansing. This book brought me to then look anew and afresh at what was presented me throughout my life and even through mainstream media as a kind of self-defense response to conflict, inside a conflict, and seeing it as inside the grand narrative of what is actually settler colonialism. I started to read a lot of other critical accounts, and this was my avenue into what then became, my own writings. I write about it now regularly in articles and so on. And this is simply information. And for me, coming into this understanding and new framing of the so-called conflict through this information, it brought me to want to actually provide this same avenue, not that it's the only one, but provide information inside a situation which is constantly bombed with propaganda. It's constantly bombed. I can say about the Israeli Zionist narrative. It omits a huge amount of information. We still have documents from 1948, which are still under censorship. Also from 1967, they are extended again and again. And this is because there are, truths that are so uncomfortable that they are simply, by law permitted to not be publicized because it could damage the Israeli state. In the mid-80s, there were a number of new historians. Ilan Pappé was one of them, Benny Morris another, Avi Schlein another. They went different ways, but they opened and looked at new declassified documents from 1948 at the time, and found that this narrative, which was easily being framed as Palestinian propaganda about the Nakba and ethnic cleansing and so on, was actually what was going on. So this is important for me to pass on and share with people this knowledge. And it's not only knowledge, it's also a perspective that allows you to see what is happening now in this light.
But was it just briefly, all this information or this enlightening situation of getting to know when Ilan Pappé published this book, was it all new to you, or yeah?
Much of it was. I mean, the actual history of the ethnic cleansing and the actual campaign of it, the premeditation of it. You should not expect that this is taught in schools, even at that time, this was like just over 10 years ago. Even saying the name ethnic cleansing, that was like crazy. That was taboo. But nowadays,
It's more.
no. I would say nowadays it's already being talked about, even from the Israeli left, center, and okay, so people like, what's his name, Ari Shavit, he's saying micro-ethnic cleansing, and maybe ethnic cleansing, and Benny Morris says, why did you say I said ethnic cleansing? I didn't say ethnic cleansing. No, they are uncomfortable with it, but it's becoming a word that is actually being applied, and looking at the documents, it's clear that some things were clearly documented, some things less, but you have to look at the grand narrative to understand this mechanism, and when you do, then you understand things like what we have seen here. Then you understand even cases like al-Khiran, which is inside so-called Israel proper, 1949 ceasefire lines, which is being ethnically cleansed. Then you understand what that means.
Okay, Tamar, do you want to continue a little? Tell us a little bit about your point of departure.
Okay, my mind is already...
Yeah, you're this. But let's hear about you, because you have a different story, and you didn't read Ilan Pappé in order to get active.
No, I think I get, at some point I had this student job at university before I became an activist. And when I think about it, maybe it gave me some background and courage to, because I was helping a blind student in his master's degree in political relationships, however you call it, in international relations. And we read a lot of texts, like among them Benny Morris, the book about 48, and also like legal texts. And then I gained some confidence that I have some concepts because before that I was like a green activist and a feminist activist and queer rights activist, but I didn't dare, I think like many girls, to go into the Palestinian-Israeli issue because girls are very easily shut down, because they say you don't understand anything about it because you weren't a combat fighter soldier. You know? You weren't a fighter, you don't know what's going on. So you don't know, there's security issues and you don't know what's going on. So I actually accepted that, you know, yeah, I don't know. So, but then so it did help me to read some text through these studies of this guy. So I did have some preparation. I think if I wouldn't have had that, I'm not sure I would have the courage to become an activist, because I would just still think, oh, I don't know anything about it. I was just a soldier teacher for kids, like a nature guide. So.
But I remember that you wrote to me that you were in Rabin's campaign in the 90s.
Yeah, just as a teenager, it was part of the youth movement. Everybody did that. So
everybody did that.
In my youth movement, there was other youth movements that did that. Things for other parties. It was part of the schedule.
The training. But another picture that you sent to me was this. I saw you guiding in Hermon, or I don't know where you were doing the guidance in the landscape. You said maybe as a youth guide, you said that you were going to show the landscape to young kids. Was it as a teacher or?
Oh yeah, as a soldier, I remember because then I was a Zionist until a decade ago, and during the army I was very into it, and I remember when I saw, because I felt I had to justify how come I'm a nature guide, because for instance three of my sisters were nature guides as well, but one of them left because it was the first Intifada, and she said, I can't deal with flowers and butterflies when the land is burning, so she went for the unit for fighting the terror in the IDF. So I felt when I became a nature guide, I felt I had to justify why I'm not trying to be as much of a fighter as a girl can be. So the explanation I found for myself is that it's important to teach the children to love the country, because then they'll be ready to die for it when they fight for it.
That's a little tough, but yeah. I suppose many nations have this kind of training, or positive version of a national narrative. But of course, the land of Israel has a certain position in the school curricula. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We can talk a little bit later, maybe about your Palestinian nanny, but let's wait with that. That's no, because I found that also. I discovered this maybe partly also reasons for your activism. You know what brought you into this mindset, because we are all curious about how we are raised as kids and how we get to understand how the world looks, who is right and who is wrong, and yeah. Barit,
yeah,
younger, 1989,
yeah,
like my brother, very young. Can you tell us a little bit about your point of departure? You said you only started to become an activist when you came to Denmark.
Yeah, I wasn't hanging around with activist groups, or I didn't have any friends that had my opinions back home. And it's also, I was not surrounded by anything like that except my brother. And my brother, I think, had a lot of influence on me. And he was, I think it was very easy for me to develop my beliefs, because I never felt attached to Israel, and I didn't grow in a home where my parents tried to push anything patriotic. Of course now it's different, but never mind. It's a whole different topic. So I think it was very easy for me to not be part of the brainwash or like the norm. And then also my brother had a lot of effect on me, and I didn't go to the army, not because of my political views back then, but I just didn't think I was the right. I didn't think this would fit me, and I'm happy that I didn't go.
In what way wouldn't it fit you?
Mentally, I think, just like me as a person, back then, and also I think now. It's not, it's a very harsh setting. It's not like, even if you don't have to be a combatant for it to be a violent setting.
Yeah.
And I came here, and then suddenly felt like I could be me and voice my opinions, and those opinions were accepted or tolerated.
Can you tell us just briefly about your opinions?
Yeah.
What is accepted here and not there?
Well, I think generally the fact that, it's a lot easier to find here people with my political left agenda than in Israel. And it's very hard for me to talk with my friends back home about how I feel and what I think. And of course in the family as well. So we try not to touch these things, so it's sort of like put aside.
What are these things that you cannot touch on?
It's hard to just define this, but I try to think a lot about solidarity and how different struggles connect. And I try to think a lot about privilege and try to reflect on also here in Denmark, like who I am in the society and my friends and so on. So this is, I guess, very important for me. And back home it's of course different. I think it's in a way it's like the most problematic thing about Israel is the fact that it completely lacks solidarity. And I think without solidarity you cannot have a society that is good, that is accepting, that has real human rights and so on. That's how I feel.
Yeah. But Tamara, sorry, I was thinking that maybe you connect to this, because we talked a little bit about this activism arriving not from the peace or two-state solution idea. You're not so involved with that structure of the state and division of country and land, but more into tolerance and human rights. And can you elaborate a little bit on this, the same, or maybe something? What is it?
I have a lot of associations from it, but
Anna, please ask them to face us
instead
of you.
That is a very good idea. Should we? I'm sorry, I'm trying to acknowledge what's being said, but it's not. It's not a very audience generous situation.
Yeah.
I tried to get us all standing, but okay. Let's face these beautiful people. Yes, please elaborate a little bit.
About the solidarity. Yeah, I thought, that it's very true. Like for me, it's like interesting here in Denmark. There's this automatic solidarity between, like even in my study program, like whoever's in the program, we care about him. It's like the beginning was like really like, because it's not like that in Israel. Like you have to, like it has to be worth it. Someone has to do something for you in order for you to care about them. And it's not like automatic, like here. So, and here it seems like artificial to me sometimes and cold and like not real. But it is real in a way. I still have to get used to it, but for sure it's different. And in Israel, it's amazing. Like also when I study in my study program about liberalism, and that it's based on a common discourse or common values. There's nothing like it in Israel. There's no way to find it. I talked with my sister about it, who's a lawyer, and she made a master's degree in public law, and she said, in Israel nobody even tries to find something like that because the society is so fractured and there's no expectation. And people just dehumanize like that, like I just went for a hike with my friend and her brother and his friends, and we were walking in the Negev, and then they were all in the army and they were still doing reserve duty. They're just mainstream people, most of them work in high tech, good looking, have wives and kids and dog. And he just said, we were involved in developing this camera. that they put it on the outside fence of some settlements and also some settlements in the Negev, used a different word, like inside Israel. And this camera, you can operate it from afar and just to shoot if it senses movement. And then he said, and it makes sense if you want to save lives of soldiers. It doesn't make sense to put a soldier there because the only ones who make movement there are Bedouins and goats. So he just said it like that, like, and Bedouins are citizens of Israel, the Bedouins in the Negev. And he said, and he did say, I know it sounds terrible, but be realistic, like it's only Bedouin and goats who move there, so it's not worth it to put a soldier because our soldiers are precious for us. So this is the kind of lack of solidarity. And this is the most mainstream person I can think of.
Jonathan, you wanted to add something?
Oh, I wanted to provide a critical note on this solidarity.
Is it possible, you think, that because I really want to look at the audience, I find that the most...
Yeah, I'm doing it.
But let's try and ignore that it's complicated. Look at the audience, because we have this conversation. But bring it on, Jonathan, and then I'm right here with you.
The critical note about the solidarity is that I think there is a kind of solidarity that happens quite automatically in Israel, but it's very conditioned on kind of tribal notions. And I'll give maybe a couple of examples. Well, when I came I visited my family in Israel last time, it's like you can get on you can take someone for a ride or buy something somewhere, and they will say to you, "Achi," like my brother. I'm your brother, yeah. Obviously under the notion that you're both Jewish. Now, if you look at extreme examples, like for example, many of you might have heard about Elor Azaria, the soldier medic who killed a Palestinian in Al Khalil in Hebron last year, executed, yes, point blank, shot to the head, big trial, big noise. And now there is, I've seen recently in the Beitar Yerushalayim, the soccer group, he's a fan and they're fans of his, so they shout, all of them chant in the games like, "Bring that boy home, we love you, Elor Azaria, and if you don't bring the boy home, we'll turn the country over." So you have this kind of solidarity, and Elor Azaria is everyone's child. That's a big campaign, and everyone's child. And so what I'm saying is that this solidarity, it runs on very nationalist lines. It's not that pretty.
Yeah, I would argue that this is not solidarity per se.
Well,
it's fake solidarity. It's solidarity for a very specific purpose. So if it's so specific, it cannot be solidarity. But that just.
And it's very typically around soldiers. Like there's nothing like soldiers to create this. Like a soldier is the most precious thing.
Yeah.
Soldiers are much more precious, not just than the enemy's civilians, also than Israeli civilians, as this person in this hike showed.
So let us try to dig a little bit deeper in the ground. Because I'm getting I agree too much with you, not in terms only of Israel, but in general I see the world very patriotic, very chauvinistic, very suppressing, and for me, I'm agreeing too much with you. So let's move on a little bit, because I see also people nodding, because everybody knows that the world is very unequal, and for certain reasons, we have an opportunity to talk about Israel, and it's a complex society in many ways, and I'm struggling a little bit with moving you into the next questions, but let's do that a little bit abruptly, and if you have questions to what we just talked about, you write it down and we'll get back to it after the break. Yes, of course.
I can say something before we bubbled a bit. You asked, you mentioned the peace activism versus...
Yes, let's...
I can...
Yes, that is very interesting. Because I tend to mix them up. So will you please differentiate? Yes, clarify.
Before we started, we were just having a little talk among ourselves, and we mentioned like having like this peace activism or activist, and then activism who focus on human rights, on justice, and so on. So I think we will have the exact same opinion on this, almost, just with variations. But I think it's very important for me, for us, to differentiate between these two groups, because if we take Israel as an example, then peace activism in Israel is in a way just some sort of type of whitewashing, because it does not address the actual reality, it does not address actual people, it does not address illegal, not illegal, but like, it could be also the word, but what do I want to say? No?
Juridical inequality.
No? International law.
International.
Yeah, I just mixed the sentence. It does not address what Israel is actually doing. And talking about peace is very nice and it's very easy, but if we don't have justice before that, the peace is empty. And that's, and if you look at the left, at the mainstream left or the liberal left or Zionist left in Israel, they talk peace, but they disregard like the actual reality, and this is not what we would like to do, I think. So I think this is one of the types of groups or of discourses that annoy me the most. Just like this. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a point, Jonathan, in that?
Well, yeah, I think about peace. I mean, the word peace has become such a rag. So that yesterday, Trump just recognized Jerusalem as, we said we wouldn't talk about it. No.
Yes.
That's not so cool. Mention Jerusalem. Trump just recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and that implies moving the embassy within a few years to their U.S. embassy. And he said it was in the best interest of peace. So on my Facebook, I found this little clip which I really wanted to find from Star Wars, one of the new Star Wars, and there's the Lord Sith, and he goes, "Once again, the Sith will rule the galaxy, and we shall have peace." But it's like, this word peace, I think one of the most, in a way, provocative, or one of the articles which I happened to provoke most, I think, was quite recently when I wrote about women wage peace. Maybe provocative also because I'm a man and it's a feminist movement, but you can read about it.
I think it's feminist.
But I was writing about the agenda. It's like, so they are saying on the one hand that it's not political, but the goal is actually to press the leaders for a political agreement. But what is involved in that, they will not get into. And it's left, right, and center. Anyone can join in on that. So even the moderate settler women, as they write.
Yehuda Glick is with them.
Oh yes, Yehuda Glick, the great Third Temple fanatic, it goes with them, and he says, let's not leave it to the left. We want peace too. So everyone wants peace, but they will dance and sing about it. But when it gets to the crunchy issues, it's you don't know where you are.
And also feminist-wise, like this is in my opinion, it's the most traditional position of women in society to just say, stop fighting. Why? I don't know, just stop it. Like, what's feminist about it? Like, I don't think it's feminist. No, it's very conservative.
Can I ask you a little spontaneously? Don't be scared. But I'm thinking, what is the difference between, or have you discovered the difference between Israeli left-wing activism and maybe like what your husband is doing? I know he's an activist for ISM. I had to check it out. I have no idea what it is, but now I found out that it is Israeli-Palestinian Solidarity Worldwide International okay, Solidarity Movement. What's the difference? Because now I'm seeing that because you're differentiating between peace and tolerance and inclusion and juridical rights and human rights inside the country, what's the difference between, I can see that you can do that only because you are Israelis maybe do you see the same as international activism in your country? You feel that you share?
I mean, you can use this notion also here in Denmark. I mean,
yes, you can.
It's the same. I mean, it's not something that I don't think as an Israeli I can. I mean, I don't know.
I just think maybe it's wrong. I just think that activism from this point of view could very easily mix up the two, like a two-country, two-nation solution, and not being so concerned about human rights. Or do you feel that you share this activism with international activism?
Well, also there in Palestine, Israel, it's not that divided. Like in Combatants for Peace, for instance, like when you talk to the Palestinians, like then, for instance, Bassam Arami, who's one of the leaders, he's in the parent circle too. He says something typical. He says, I don't care if it's 1 state, 2 states, or 0 states, or 1,000 states. I just want, because his daughter was killed, so he wants his daughters to go safely to school. And in many of also in Ta'ayush, some people, they come as Zionists, like I did. And, well, I actually don't know anyone who stayed Zionist, but some people participate as Zionists in the beginning, because so there's not such a, like it's a little fluid there too, so.
So let's dig into the Zionist issue, because I think it will interest the audience. We love that issue, and we would like, first of all, to know if it's around still. And secondly, I would like to ask you, in the context of, I don't know if you're a radical left-wing, I'm a little scared about that, but okay, let's say you're a radical left-wing activist, let's stay with that. So how would this left-wing activism look without Zionism, and how would the left-wing party look? How would the left-wing position look in Israel? Jonathan, you have some...
Maybe we should define Zionism first?
Let's define something. Yes.
Let me take.
Jonathan was starting.
Everything that you're asking.
Yes.
Because exactly. We need. I mean, it's a crunchy question because we need to define the paradigm. And when you say far left, we keep kind of apologizing for it. You say, I'm not right, not left. With far left, we sort of put far in quotes and so on. We don't know what to do with that. How far is it? How left is it? Now, I think it's important to mark here that the political paradigm in Israel is a conditioned one. It's conditioned by Zionism to be Zionist. And the way it was conditioned, it's very simple actually. It was conditioned by ethnic cleansing to begin with. The State of Israel was created in 1948, involving the dispossession of roughly 750,000 Palestinians out of the 900,000 within the what became the first ceasefire lines, borders, if you will, of Israel. And this left, 10-15% population which was non-Jewish. Now this could enable the polity to be a Jewish majority, and what we call Jewish and democratic. You could have a democracy where it will always work with the Jewish Zionist bias, simply because those who weren't were not there. And this actually continues on. This is a continuing, I would say, obsession, the demographic obsession, and to keep the non-Jewish, the Palestinian population, mostly the Palestinian population, at the limit of around 20%. This was, by the way, the deliberations even before the establishment of the state, around 15, maybe 20% tops. So you have the imagination that it's a democratic society because, hey, there's an Arab who's a Supreme Court judge, because there's a quote, you know, Arabs have equal voting rights and so on and so forth. But the reality of it is that it's conditioned. So within this paradigm, you get the far left, and mostly the Palestinians will be on that far left simply because the right is always the Zionist one. Most Palestinians would not dream of being Zionists. But the whole, virtually the whole Jewish Israeli paradigm is Zionist. So you get, for example, the leader of the Zionist Union, which is the Labor Plus, well, ex-leader sort of, no, Herzog, Isaac Herzog, now he's sort of, they changed leadership to Avi Gabay, never mind, but he's still the leader in the parliament, in the Knesset. So you get Herzog saying, we have to watch out that we won't be seen as Arab lovers. That's a leftist.
And the ex-Ehud Barak,
and
he said the Palestinian people should understand that they're a defeated people. This is the head of the left-wing Zionism.
Yeah. And and he brags about how the left liberated the occupied territories in 1967. But never mind, you understand you get the gist. Now, even in terms of law, in the party law, any party who actually wants to challenge does not affirm Israel as a Jewish and democratic. This is the meaning of this Jewish and democratic. It's actually about the Jewish, not so much the democratic. Any party that challenges it per program is simply not allowed to run. So challenging of the Zionist paradigm is simply illegal. Never mind that Balad still tries to do it, but and lawmakers, the Zionist lawmakers are trying to do anything to get them excluded. But you know, that's the big paradigm. So when you sort of reach beyond the Zionist frame, as we do, you are basically considered a radical leftist, although extreme leftist. Although in the world at large, the concept of equality, freedom, justice, these things are considered just, you know, normal, typical leftist things.
But not when it comes to Zionism. That I discovered here. I was very disappointed. No, that Zionism, it's just, like, first of all, it hijacked Judaism, that's for sure. Like, you can't be a Jew if you're not a Zionist anymore. Like, it's pretty much like that. And if you're anti-Zionist, then you're anti-Semitic and all these identifications.
Even if you're Jewish.
Yeah, then you're a self-hating Jew.
Yeah.
And it's like, my father is from Canada, and I know like how many non-Zionist Jews there were, like just a couple of generations ago, and it doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's like the community center in my father's town, not town, city. Like now there's just a huge Israel flag on the Jewish community center. It's like completely hijacked. And when I talked to one of my relatives, her grandfather wasn't a Zionist, and he was the head of the Jewish community center there just 2 generations ago. Now they wouldn't have let him in, I think. Mm-hmm. So, and it's not like that just among Jews. It's like the mainstream, at least where I studied, the study program, I still have clashes about that. So maybe I shouldn't talk too much
Can
because I don't have a degree.
Can I ask you, because now it's moving a little bit in a, for me, a very interesting direction, moving you into the world that is not Israel, because can you understand this development? Can you see what has happened in the context of Europe and the US, and do you see this connected? Because I don't see it necessarily as Zionism. I see it as the only tool that we were trained to use to protect ourselves in the context of being Jewish. So I would just like to, I always had this question to Israelis, right or left, are you seeing the diaspora context? Do you understand the world? Because I wanted to connect to you guys. I want to be like you. I want to have your opinions. But from a diaspora perspective, let's say I'm a diaspora Jew, I'm pretending to be a diaspora, I'm a mix, I'm both, I'm all, But can you understand why the reactions are like this flag coming up? No, I'm trying to...
Psychologically?
Yes, psychologically.
People?
Yes.
Yeah, I could understand that, as I can understand somebody who is, racist. I can understand that they have never met somebody who is not like themselves. So it's that type of understanding that I could have towards that. But it's not an understanding that is empathic in a deep sort of connection to it. I don't understand it in the sense that I accept it. I understand it in the sense that we're humans, and I understand that we are very complex and we have, it's endless.
But you said hijack Judaism.
Yeah, because...
Yes, Jonathan, you have something on that.
Yeah, I want to do a little naughty game here. You obviously think of us as Israelis, right? Do you agree we're kind of Israelis?
Yeah.
And when we say that, obviously what's in your head normally is that, what does that mean? Israeli nationals, right? You think we're Israeli nationals, right? But I may surprise you to tell you that we are not. We are not Israeli nationals. And Israeli nationality does not exist. We do not exist as Israelis. This is virtually so. If I show you my passport, you'd see nationality Israeli, but that's just an actually institutionalized lie. It doesn't exist. People, Israelis who wanted their nationality to be written as Israeli in the ID cards, they got the response from the Supreme Court that Israel does not recognize an Israeli nationality. And the reason it does not recognize that is because Israel has about 130 different nationalities it does recognize, and most importantly, one of them is Jewish. It considers Jews a nationality. On the other hand, you don't get, certainly not a Palestinian, that's not recognized as a nationality. No, you get Arab. And most of the non-Jews are simply Arabs, and then they will register their religion to somewhere, Arab Christian, Arab Druze, Arab Muslim, but Jew will always by default, Jewish national will also by default be written as Jewish religion. So it's a one whole thing, which is totally encompassing, and the only real Israelis, there are no real Israelis, national-wise. The only ones who are closest to being Israelis and have the national rights are the Jews. All the others have only the citizenship rights. And this is a huge thing to understand about Zionism. So when you talk about Israelis and you want to be like us, and we actually have to recognize that Zionism defined a paradigm that is extraterritorial. It's extraterritorial to Israel. Israel is not the state of its citizens. It is actually the state of the Jews, the Jewish state. They want to also completely cement this in a new basic law, number 16, I think, the nation state of the Jewish people. But it exists de facto in all kinds of other laws in Israel. So actually, when you talk about solidarity and all, we have to understand these basic paradigms, what Zionism has defined for us. And when we are talking about being non-Zionist or anti-Zionist, what we are reaching out for is simply relegating this whole religious thing, this whole supposedly ethnic Jewish thing. I don't think there is a Jewish ethnicity. You know, it's relegating it down to where are you living? Are you a Danish national? So be a Danish national. Are you also a Jew? Okay, you can be a Danish Jew. That's fine. You know, you're not either a Jew or a Danish. But Zionism is actually defining for us that if you're a Jew, you actually sort of belong to Israel. And the Israeli leaders like Netanyahu is coming after the Paris attacks. Israel is your home, he says to the French people. He got quite a lot of protest from them. What do you mean? No, we're French. Are you going to start anti-Semitism here? You know, to say to the French people, Jews don't belong in this country? That's what he's doing. Israel is your home.
Yeah, even the left, the so-called Zionist left, even I know an activist who he's the head of an organization for equal rights for Palestinian Israelis. He's as left as you can be while still Zionist. And he wrote just without even thinking about it in one of his articles, well, since the Holocaust, we know that there's no room for Jews in Europe. So, of course, I know it because of my grandparents, and this is why we have to be here. And I tell him, excuse me, like, it's really like, even if you don't think about Palestinians at all, it's very problematic, like, towards Jews around the world, this Zionist idea. Why does the Zionist state claim to represent all the Jews in the world? It never asked them. Why does every Jew has to feel that he's represented by this state that he never chose just because he was born a Jew? This is non-democratic, even if you don't consider the Palestinian issue at all, like just towards the Jews. You know?
And simultaneously, of course, if you are an Israeli Jew and you live in Israel, or you don't, never mind, if you live in Israel and you have the opinions that we have, then it's something else. Then you are excluded, even if not officially.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to imagine. It's just an act. It's not me. I'm just trying to imagine something, positioning myself, and trying to understand what would happen to my sense of Jewishness if Israel was no longer a Jewish state. Could you elaborate with me for a moment? What would happen to me? Because you seem to have this sensation that we don't need Israel as Jews.
It even harms, you know, like there's very like clear statistics about how after every Israeli aggression in Gaza, for instance, there's a sharp incline in so-called anti-Semitic attacks. So Jews have to suffer that. Jews all over the world, in Turkey, in Sweden, in Copenhagen, like the shooting in Copenhagen, everybody presented as Scandinavian anti-Semitism. It's so hard to look into it and actually see, like people in Israel, they just asked me, how are you coping with this horrible Scandinavian anti-Semitism? And I told them, the guy, okay, I don't want to talk personally about the guy, he had his problem, but one of his parents was a son of Palestinian refugees. Do you really think you can label it as Scandinavian anti-Semitism? It's a little out of reality. Like, yes, it affects and it puts Jews in danger. Zionism puts Jews in danger all over the world. I'm not justifying violence against the civilians, but I was just with my study program in the synagogue in Malmo, and they were talking about that they have to have these bulletproof windows and all this anti-Semitism from the Muslims. First of all, anti-Semitism is a European term. The fact that Europe is frozen on the Arabs and Muslims, it's already twisted. And like I asked them, excuse me, we were just in the Oslo synagogue, and I heard that they were having this prayer for the IDF, where you pray. You don't only pray for the safety of the IDF soldiers, you pray for their success, and you pray for the enemy to be smashed under them twice. And the enemy, as we know, most of this enemy, or at least half of it, is civilians and kids. And And like if you pray for that in the synagogue, and my professor was defining this visit as, unfortunately, they're not wise enough to separate. Yeah, maybe the Jews should be wise enough to separate, because this guy is. I only had to push him a little bit and say so, and asked about that, and he started saying, yeah, I have the right to be proud of my country. And then I asked him, and your country is Israel? So he said, yes, a Swedish Jew. So that's where Zionism puts Jews around the world. It forces them to choose, and they choose Israel. Also, my relatives in Canada, they vote for whoever supports Israel. They always voted liberals until Harper was the conservatives, so they voted conservatives at the age of 60. And they're like lawyers, they're very educated people, but they have this loyalty conflict and they're forced to choose. And I think it's a shame. I think Jews will be much better off without that.
For me, it's very complicated. Not it's emotional, but complicated because it has. Is it complicated for you?
Not for me, no. But I understand
the complexity.
Yeah, I understand it's emotional.
It's emotional. Yes,
I don't feel it, but yeah, of course I understand.
Can I ask you before the break, because then you'll have an opportunity to take, drink a bit of water and go to the loo and come back. I ask you in my few questions. Do you feel estranged in Israel? Are you alienated? Do you feel that people don't support this mindset, or do you find it difficult to connect to people with this discussion? Yes, can you elaborate a little bit? Do you have examples of situations or something? I think it would be interesting for the audience to share that. Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
I really like what you wrote in the email.
You wrote something in the email. Do you want me to read it, or do you remember?
I don't remember.
Try again, and I'll add on to it if you don't.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't want to speak too much about my family, but I think it's a pretty normal situation. I mean, it's not like a special situation, and this is something that is. It certainly doesn't bring pride, to speak openly about the things that I do and just did write about them. And what I think you find even in a liberal sort of leftist family like mine, I would say, it's like it becomes an issue that is simply not discussed. It can be obviously worse, but often, families or societies that still want to keep you, if they don't, I've had, old school comrades calling me, the most despicable of any despicables, and I can't believe what you're saying, and, never want to speak to you again. Okay, no, but if you still have, a family or a grouping that still wants to deal with you, it becomes sort of an unsaid, knowing that, or even decision, from the people that we simply cannot get into these issues, and better to not start any political talk because you don't know if it will get to that point where we'll mention the war, which is Zionism, or the very central essential ideology of the Jewish state. If it gets there, it becomes illegitimate, and don't want to deal with it. So these things get closed down. You want to say?
I have an example. Yeah. That's good. I think the first time I really felt like a sense of like being strange was I did 1 year in Tel Aviv University, biology. Terrible. Anyway, so then I joined the political, how do you call it? Like on campus? Political movement or no, because you have you have also election for like the students' council and stuff like that. So it's connected. Yeah, so it's like separated into a few groups. So I was in a small one that my brother was also there, and he took me. And so I was running in biology for the election, and I remember at some point, I don't remember the year exactly, it feels like it was 20 years ago, but I think it was like very close to one of our wars on Gaza. And they did a demonstration on campus against that.
212, 214,
No,
209, 2089, 20.
When did I finish school? I finished 26. Never mind, it's not the point. Yeah, I know, so that's why I said one of them. So there was a demonstration against the war, the operation, as the Israelis like to call, and my brother was there. And then afterwards, a little while afterwards, there was this like gossip in the halls of like, I was studying with a lot of students, we were like 300 people, and there was this talk around me as a sister of somebody who went to that demonstration, and like my brother was always had when he was in university, he had this like, he always wore a hat and everybody knew him, and so it's the first time I felt like, why is this, I mean, they're talking about me as like the sister of this person who went actually to this demonstration, and that felt so weird. I was like, it was just very weird for me to feel that, and I was 20 or 19, I think, it was just very weird for me.
I have something a little similar, but from a different angle, but just recently I was at a funeral of a friend of the family who was killed very terribly in a kibbutz, and they're probably like Zionist left, so-called, and also most of my family. But some of my siblings are like, they're still Zionist left, but they're in some issues they're more approaching my position, and so sometimes they go to demonstration, which I don't think I would go to them, but you know, that I can agree with some things. And there was one demonstration that was about the Palestinian issue. I don't remember exactly what it was. But my sister, actually a couple of my siblings went to this demo. And then in this funeral, one of the brothers of the person who was killed, it was very uncomfortable because he sees me as the left winger, and he always addresses me as the left winger because I'm just marked, you know. And he always does that, but he did this in the funeral too. And he said, "Oh, are you still doing that?" Or he just said, "Yeah, you know, this other left winger that I told you, I know, he was in this demo out there. Were you there?" So I said, and then the conversation went on, and my sister wouldn't say that she was there, because then it would cast her as, you know, then she would be marked just like me, and she didn't want to do that. So at some point I just had to say, "You were there," like to my sister, and she's like, "Yeah." Like, you know, but you could see that she really, like, because it's so significant. If she puts herself there, then it's a real risk. She's something else, you know. This family, they can't relate to me in any other way. Like there were a few other, you know, addressing me during this funeral, and it was all about that. Like, this is what I am. There's nothing else there. Like, I'm just, you know, stamped.
And yeah.
Journalist Gideon Levy wrote a few months ago that in Israel, non-Zionist or anti-Zionist are not insults. These are social exclusion orders. Yeah, to sum that up.
Very interesting. And I can just add to this that since we started the Jewish Film Festival in Copenhagen in 2000, we've had several occasions where we almost, you know, separated in the group. Because I always wanted to bring Israel in as a vulnerable topic. I always wanted to expose that we do not resemble what's going on in Israel. We want to oppose and ask questions and open the veil, what's going, you know, and this was always something that we we struggled a little bit with, because in my own background, in my own environment, I would easily meet people who want to censor little things, little stupid things that I wanted to bring into the audience. And I feel that constantly going on, you know, very sensitive to what's possible to show. And we had a strict cooperation, we had a cooperation with the Israeli embassy for many, many years, because they provide us with money. It's as simple as that. I don't need them in general, because they don't know how to find good quality films or anything like that. And usually they don't give a franc about culture anyway. But sometimes they bring a little bit of money and we're suffocating because we don't have money. And they would always be there, you know, asking questions. Why this film, and why don't you bring this film? And you know, just for I was raised and born in a very free country like this, and embassies are not supposed to interfere with what you choose and what you do not choose. And I just recall many situations that maybe resemble what, not being estranged maybe, but more like, you know, having this sensitivity going on, that there are things that we cannot bring into the light of the day. I don't even know exactly what it is, because, you know, we fairly often talk very open-minded. I think it's time for a small break of, Masih, is it 15 minutes?
Hello, my name is Sally, and I would like to ask a question in the broader perspective, because personally I kind of always shift between thinking that real change and to bring justice for the Palestinians is something that needs to come from the outside, needs to be implemented by international community, or someone to say to Israel, you have to stop this won't work anymore. And I shift between thinking that and the other position, which is that change needs to come from the inside, from within Israeli society. And I would just like to hear your opinions and thoughts on what do you think it takes to bring justice?
I totally understand that. I mean, something that I also myself have been thinking about it. I do believe that eventually change has to come from within Israel. Yeah, at the end of the day, this is what has to happen, because it's not only about laws and regulations and international community stepping in and whatever. Because at the end of the day, a country is made out of people, and even if the system on paper seems equal suddenly, it doesn't mean that this is the situation. And so I think it has to be a combination of the two. But I think people, internationals that are taking part in this, also have to remember the Israeli society and also need to understand the Israeli society. Not agree with everything, but they have to understand aspects of the Israeli society if they want to help make a change. So, yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think maybe also many of you know that Israeli is a very complex place, even if you disregard the Israel-Palestine. I didn't want to use the word issue, it seems to be. Never mind. Israel is made out of a lot of different types of Jews, and a lot of different types of racism, and a lot of different types of gaps in society, and many struggles that need to happen maybe together in order for change to happen, because human rights is a package, and all the change needs to lead to the same place. But we also need to understand, why is it even like that Israel is mostly right-wing, that Israel is so racist, so militaristic? It's something that we as people who fight against it must understand where it comes from and why. And we cannot just call them these Zionist or these racist, or because that doesn't help. We have to do more than that. So, and it's hard sometimes, it is, because it's very emotional also. But,
you understand?
Yeah, in terms of the logic of pressure from without, I think the logic of that is very, very strong. In that, I do not think that there is an effective political dynamic in Israel today to change things in a substantial way. This is also why there has been a call from about 2005 from a range of Palestinian organizations to boycott Israel, what is known as the BDS. And there is also what is known as BDS from within. This is an Israeli organization of people who actually support the idea of pressure in what is known as democratic, non-violent sanctions, means of pressure against Israel. There is a group, there is a movement in Israel supporting that. They can obviously not really do that from within that much because they're working in Israel. Of course, they are consuming Israeli products and so on and so forth, but they are supporting the international movement for that, realizing that that needs to come from without. And you will get also, for example, a journalist I mentioned, Gideon Levy, will say, you know, he has come to this realization that there are no forces that can do this. How can you imagine this can be done without grassroots boycotts and sanctions, divestment, and so on? The problem is Israel realizes that this is a problem, and in the last couple of years has upped its efforts to fight this BDS with millions, hundreds of millions of shekels, and is running a campaign under the minister of Hasbara, which we know as propaganda, Gilad Erdan. He's Minister of Public Security and Hasbara, that's Zionist propaganda. They have a whole team of which works in like black op modes, and a lot of it is kept secret, admittedly kept secret, and they try to undermine any movement of this happening and try to promote laws against it, which has been going pretty well in USA through the Israeli lobbies and so on and so forth. There is a big challenge in that, and of course Israel is trying to label any attempt of this kind as anti-Semitic simply because it might challenge the Jewish state and so on, simply trying to hold Israel to international law. Sorry, that was one.
Yes. Do you have a point?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Is that okay? And then it's you next? Yeah?
This one.
Okay, so I used to think that I started, as I said, as a Zionist, even as an activist, and I was very focused in like changing from within, and then, but as the time passed, I realized that I was in Combatants for Peace for a while, and this organization is very focused on like aiming at the Israeli mainstream and trying to change it. But after a while, I understood that this is not going to work because Israelis are the privileged side, and they're not going to give up their privileges voluntarily. It's not natural. It's just people don't work like that. It's not just them. Like the apartheid South Africa, the whites would never give up the apartheid just because they were convinced to do it out of rational. Like it was because they were forced to. Miko Pellet said, and he was speaking here too, that sometimes people have to be spanked, and of course I don't want them to be spanked physically because it's my family and friends, and I'm there. My mother lives in Jerusalem. I really don't want the situation to escalate. I'm worried about them and I love them. And that's why I think BDS, unfortunately, is like that, because it's not going to work through, this conversation. It's not going to work. So they have to be forced.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. My name is Jens Allen Jensen. I was originally going to ask you about the BDS, but we already cleared that question. So moving along, I would like to hear your opinion. What should the status of Jerusalem be in the future?
In what?
Jerusalem.
In the future.
In the future.
Like tomorrow.
Like tomorrow. Maybe today. What would you like the status of Jerusalem?
Why is he all of a sudden asking about Jerusalem? Like,
I was interested in Jerusalem before.
I don't know if I can say anything interesting.
But you just wrote about it. You didn't even get to
oh yeah, it just appeared my article on Jerusalem. What?
What did you write?
Oh, about they just published in Mondoweiss a few hours ago that I wrote. I mean, everyone's talking now about Jerusalem and about Trump.
Speak nice.
And obviously the focus is on Trump, but I was pointing out how Ehud Barak, the leftist hero, Mr. Security, former prime minister, he was actually wondering, he was saying, I like it. He likes the idea. Ahead of Trump's decision, he was sort of giving the green light from the sort of opposition, yeah? And he was saying he doesn't understand why it wasn't done like 65 years ago. But Jerusalem, well, I wrote about the history of it, but I'll try to make it short, that even from the 1948 paradigm, there were resolutions to return Jerusalem to the corpus separatum intention of the United Nations in the partition plan. The corpus separatum is like a separate entity that would be under international auspices. That was the intention of the Resolution 181 of 29th November 1947, which Israel declared as irrevocable, a kind of irrevocable recognition. But suddenly it wasn't irrevocable when Resolution 194, mooted by Volker Bernadotte, who got murdered for it, that was not kosher because it suggested return of the refugees. It also suggested returning Jerusalem to being a corpus separatum. Obviously, the Zionists would not have this. That's already from 1948. From the 1967 paradigm, of course, Israel in 1948 took over a part of Jerusalem, which became so-called West Jerusalem, and there was East Jerusalem. 1967, Israel takes over all of Jerusalem, and by the way, expands its borders many times over. But from then on, Israel de facto annexed Jerusalem, and it de jure annexed in 1980 in the base law Jerusalem, and that was heavily condemned. There's loads of UN Security Council and General Assembly resolutions condemning this, especially this annexation and changing of the status of Jerusalem, because it is supposed to be an issue for a Palestinian state, and it's supposed to be, it has been long-standing US official policy at least, that this should be, and global policy, that this should be an item for final status negotiations. Jerusalem is the heart of this two-state idea. So basically what Trump was doing now, he was saying, drop it, Jerusalem will be united as the Jewish, the capital of Israel. Maybe he would have said for all eternity, he didn't. But, and then, and sort out the rest of it. But the idea that Jerusalem is united, the united capital, and Palestinians should just make do with everything else, by Ehud Barak, he said, if you just explain it to the Arabs, it'll be okay. If we just explain to them that it doesn't mean that there's no peace process. It just means that all of Jerusalem is ours. They'll understand it. This is the logic of it. Where does this lead? I cannot tell you.
Let's ask, yes, exactly, Tamara, because your mother, she lives in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and I lived in Jerusalem for about a decade before I moved here, and all my years of activism were there. Much of my activism was in the city. in East Jerusalem. I also worked in East Jerusalem as a Hebrew teacher. It's a great source of income for activists because they have some access to Palestinians, and Palestinians in East Jerusalem are forced to learn Hebrew because of the wall, because they can't go to study in the West Bank, and they can't even go to Abu Dis, the university, Al-Quds University, because it's behind the wall. So they're forced to study in Israeli universities in West Jerusalem, and so they have to acquire Hebrew, and that's where we make our money. I did that for a while, and before I did that, I remember in well, maybe you don't know, because the vast majority of Israelis don't know that the East Jerusalemites are not Israeli citizens. They're residents. They're actually temporary residents, just like me in Denmark. And even though many of them are there for generations and were born there, and their grandfather was born there, and their residency can be denied very easily if they just spend a few years abroad or whatever, if they don't pay their taxes, their municipal taxes. So they're not citizens, and it's overwhelmingly unknown. I had a neighbor in Jerusalem who was a lawyer, and she was in a dialogue group with East Jerusalemites for a year. And towards the end of this year, she told me something about it, and I asked her, and it sounded like she thought they were citizens. So I said, you know they're not citizens. And she said, oh, really? You know, it's just overwhelming how Israelis don't know it. But that's the truth. They're not citizens. They suffer huge discrimination. It's like very few Israelis cross the line. Very few Israelis were ever in East Jerusalem. That's why it's so weird that it's so important for Israelis to keep East Jerusalem, to keep Jerusalem unified, because they never go to these places. It's completely separated. But they just want it in their heads. They think it should be unified. And the Palestinians, they don't vote. Some of them have an option to become citizens, and it's very hard actually. But as a collective, they decide not to do it. Many of their leaders encourage them not to do it, and I think I can really appreciate it. You know, I don't judge those of them who do become citizens, because of course I can't judge them in their situation. But I really respect those who don't, who are the majority, because they just want to be in solidarity with their brothers and sisters in the West Bank. And I think it's very beautiful, because they could just say, we don't care about them, we're a part of Israel, just let them go. But they don't do that. They say, as long as Israel unilaterally annexes the East Jerusalem, which is the natural capital of the West Bank, and like leaves all these Palestinians behind the wall, we're not going to recognize that. We're not going to vote for the municipal elections. And in the last elections where I lived there, just out of solidarity with my students, I didn't vote, just like them. Well, I'm not trying to say I'm like them, of course I'm much more privileged, but at least in that I was trying to show some solidarity. And what you asked about the future, well, I think all of us share a general vision of a democratic state in mandatory Palestine, you know, between the river and the sea. And Jerusalem should be part of that. I don't think parts of Jerusalem should be restricted for according to religion, because the definition of Jewish, according to the Israeli law, is based on religious criteria. It's not. There's no other criteria, because that's the only criterion for Judaism. You know, you can't find another criteria that is shared by all Jews, except this religious criterion. So the truth is, the citizenship in the whole of Israel, and specifically in Jerusalem, is defined by religious criteria. I think it has to stop, and I think Jerusalem should be open for all its residents. They should all have equal civilian rights, equal status, and equal condition, and without discrimination. And the neighborhoods shouldn't differ so much in how they look like. In this situation, and when it's inside an arrangement with the whole of the West Bank and Gaza and the Palestinian refugees, then these students of mine will be glad to vote for the municipal elections, and I'm sure. And I think it might come much sooner than we think.
So it sounds like it's not peace and human rights, it's human rights and peace. It's kind of interesting to see how you look at this situation, opportunities for citizens, and yeah, very interesting. Can I just add, because from a film perspective, yes, I know, what I see coming in for the last 17 years, it may be an art perspective or cultural perspective of Jerusalem, which is completely non-political, and it's not an answer to the future, but it's a tendency that I see going on in Israel, and that is everything that has to do with Jerusalem these days only talks about radical religion. And if it's not radical religion, it's a horror. We had 2 horror movies coming in. So I think that, you know, it's not a sign in the future, but it's something that's going on in the mindset of young filmmakers. Kind of interesting to see. So that's just an add-on. So we have 3, at least 4. Mr. Sousa, 5. Remember, help me out. I have you know. Oh, it's growing. So more dynamic.
Yes, my name is Sean Sousa. I born in Baghdad. I speak Arabic in Baghdadi's accent. And normally I don't believe all the Israeli newspapers, even I read all of them. So every year I take a trip to all the Palestinian city and East Jerusalem, just to understand once again. The problem with these 3 young people, they know nothing about the Palestinian. The Palestinian was not mentioned here. The Palestinians have one dream. In Arabic it's called Al-Bah al-Yahud al-Bahr. It's kill the Jew and throw them to the sea. This is the only thing who block it for everything. And if someone thinks that the Palestinians don't want peace, not want to give peace to the Israelis, it's not true. They would love to give them peace. In Arabic it's called Bal-Ard al-Bahr. When I stand on your grave or I throw you to the sea, you can get all the peace you want. I mean, it's completely ridiculous that these people, all the left in Israel, they don't listen to the Palestinians. They don't hide anything. They shout their plane every day, every minute. You can ask every children. You can go to the Palestinian city, Bethlehem, Ramallah, Nablus, they send a map with a big Palestine. Say, hey, where's Israel? So this country doesn't exist. They say, hey, fantastic. So you won the war. So no. As you can see here in the beach, and along the beach, there's a few Jewish today. When we were thrown into the sea, so we went to the war. But all this thought about peace. No one Arab people in all the Middle East have peace. Why? The most hated minority in the world, and especially in the Middle East, will get peace from the Palestinians. Are you crazy or what? No Palestinians have peace. With whom you want to make peace? The women have no peace. The Palestinians have a law. Just 1 minute, I finish now. The Palestinians have law. Every man have a right to kill his wife, his daughter, and his sister. And this right, you can't discuss.
I think you
Do you have a question?
You are talking only nonsense.
There's not a nonsense.
Stop this nonsense.
No. Let the gentleman talk. It's okay.
Yes.
Can I ask you to
Yes, you can ask
consider the congregation, the community of? There's a lot of students here, and I think that I feel they are too bright or too well educated to accept. And I want to challenge you a little bit, because I think they're too bright to accept the way you describe the world of Arabs and Palestinians. I think so. This is my immediate standpoint, and I would like you to readdress, try to think, in order to create the dialogue with these intelligent people here as well. What's your concern? Mr. Sousa, I want to know what's your concern and what's the real... I really want to understand this. Can we challenge it a little bit? Because I want the dialogue.
Maybe we get a question.
Yes, ask them a question. Can you ask a question?
Listen, it's not about asking a question. I want all the left in Israel to study the culture of the Muslim, to study the culture of the Palestinian.
So what's
the Arab being the king of the world for 800 years ago.
Okay,
800 years ago is like yesterday.
But Mr.
Today they are nothing, they are zero.
Okay, so let's raise that as a question. Do you agree with Mr. Sousa on this, and how do you see this?
What was the question?
The question is that the Arab world wants to kill the Jews, send them into the sea, that you have never met a Palestinian, that you don't know what you're talking about, that they no, this is what I got. I mean, is it true or not true? Constantine, maybe you pronounced it a little more. They don't have contact with Palestinians. Please elaborate. Let's accept the question. Let's accept the question.
No,
yes.
Allow me to answer the non-existent question in rather a mirror fashion to the way in which you presented this non-existent question, which is not really an answer to you, because you did not ask a question. What is obvious to me is that you don't want to hear answers, because your narrative is so enclosed that any discussion of it will just be a disturbance to you. And I believe that this is the reason why you are not asking a question. You want to enforce your views upon us? Fine, I'm not impressed. Thank you.
Tamar, do you have a response? Because obviously in your work, in your activism, you meet people that you disagree with, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, actually, I appreciate your courage, because I think most of the audience here, they
agree with you. Everybody here agree with you, almost except Mr. Sousa. So it is courageous.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
But I think, like, as far as I know, there's about 300 million Arabs in the world today, and I find it fascinating that you know exactly what each one of them thinks and wants. First of all, that I appreciate even more. And there's a few Palestinians, and I also wonder how many of them you spoke to, since I'm not sure how many years you lived there and how much contact you had. As I said, I had contact with Palestinians all my life, since I was a baby actually. And, there are some Palestinians in the crowd here who don't agree with you, so I think you should reconsider your certainty in this massive generalization that you're doing.
I would just say that, well, if they all want to kill us, first of all, I think we, the Israelis, we're winning. We're killing more of them. So, should be happy with that. And yeah, I don't...
But what if it's a real fear? Let's not make fun of it. Because I also feel this fear. It's not something that it's not something that I don't recognize. Please.
No, but I don't think the way he talks, I don't think he deserves my response at all.
Okay.
I'm sorry. He could have said how he feels in a different way, and he chose to do it the way he did.
Actually, I have...
It's enough. So there's some other questions, and I would like the younger participants also to address. So I would like you, and then we have you, and then you, yes. But you first.
Sure. Thank you. Yesterday I had this thought that I may have lost quite a few of my Israeli friends. Why? Well, because we had fierce debates last night about the announcements, and it turned to a point where I thought, well, I mean, can we still have a casual discussion about something that's not related to the conflict? I got a lot of these friends in a travel I had earlier this year in Israel and Palestine. It ended in a very intense encounter in Palestine. And particularly those weeks in Palestine, they turned me into a very fierce defender for the Palestinian case. Which turned out, well, to be very problematic for the friends I already had who were Jewish, Israeli. And for me, before going to Israel and Palestine, I had a very uncomplicated relation to Israelis, to Jews. I had a Jewish boyfriend, and it was something you didn't think about prior to going there. But after having been there, I have experience quite complicated feelings, and I mean also when I hear Hebrew being spoken, when I don't realize what language it is, I think, oh, that reminds me of a great experience I had. When I realize it's Hebrew, then there's this feeling of criticism and maybe even hostility, because it reminds you of a lot of the downright racism that you can encounter in Israel. So my question is, how can you have all these encounters with a wide range of opinions and feelings and people without turning hostile, without turning anti-Semitic, without turning polarized in each of the different ranges of this big spectrum this conflict includes?
I'm not sure I got the question.
How can you stay involved emotionally in this conflict with lots of Palestinian friends, with Israeli friends, without turning anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, or anti-Semitic in this very polarized debate? That's my conflict, and that's my question to you.
It's an interesting question. I don't know if as Israelis it's a bit different for us to answer that. I mean, I'm sure it is different for us to answer that, right? I mean, but of course I understand like what you're saying, because it's like we experience that as well. I guess all of us. To be, yeah. I don't know actually. I mean, it's really hard to avoid, because you touch people's identities and it's always turns into, it's always heated, almost always heated. I can't just be logic when I talk about these things. I can't, so I can sometimes be unpleasant and I can be annoyed and it's difficult. And also remember that it's always like at least two people, right? So it's not only up to you. And you cannot just stay like in your own mindset, because if somebody makes you angry or sad, it's okay that you respond to it. But I don't know if I have an answer really to that. It's just really hard.
I would like.
You have to struggle with that a little bit more before you decide what to do with that struggle. But I can tell you one thing: to feel really, to have a struggle when you listen to a language. I think the Jewish experience is very much connecting to the German language. We had this in our raising. We had a problem with the German language because the German language invented discrimination. And I can tell you today that I don't have a problem with the German language because I know Germans and I traveled in Germany and I seek information and I know for a fact that it's one of the prettiest and most enriched languages we have in Europe. It's a diverse, everything intellectual is developed in German. So we have to, we have to dig into the cultures and the people and not to struggle with antipathy because we listen to a language. That's, for me, we need to do that. We need to struggle with that a bit more. But it's an interesting question. I think I needed to address that a little bit. There's a question here?
I think Jonathan was before.
Were you before?
Yeah. He was from the beginning. Later?
When I feel that when I share stuff about things that happen in Palestine and do advocacy for the Palestinian cause, or what you want to call it, I'm very often faced with this question of what about the Israelis dying? What about the fear of the Israelis? And as someone who also has Israeli family and who has grown up with this fear of what's going to happen to them and also the fear of what's going to happen to me when I'm there, I usually say that the reason why I support the Palestinian case, or the reason why I began supporting the Palestinian case, was out of this love towards my own family and the wish that they once will live in freedom and without the fear that necessarily will come from towards the oppressor when being an oppressor. How do you relate to this issue? How does the fear of your safety when in Israel and to your Israeli family, how does this play a role, and what would your response be to this kind of question?
I actually, when you raised a similar question actually a few minutes ago in response to this gentleman, the issue of fear, that the fear is real and it's true. I think the fear is also very intentionally developed. Like it's very strong in Israeli, especially under Netanyahu. He's a master of fear. He's really good at blowing it up. But the fear, it exists and it's inherent to the situation. And I think every oppressor, as Jonathan said, will be bound to experience this fear, and it's in every society, every settler, colonial, or every apartheid or oppressive society, and it's okay to acknowledge it. And I was in the beginning of my activism. This was my motivation. This is how when I was still a Zionist, even I told myself, I'm here in solidarity with the Palestinians when some really ugly deeds are done to them by the settlers, because typically to Zionist left, I was like demonizing the settlers also as a means to deal with my own guilt. I was like saying, these settlers, they're horrible. Still, a lot of my family do that, and I try not to do it anymore because it's problematic. But when I was going to the West Bank, and I was like after the settlers hurt some Palestinians, I was saying to myself and others that I was there to show the Palestinians that there's other Israelis, so they won't be motivated to hurt us, so they won't go in and make an explosion in a bus, or it was the second Intifada. And so this is what I was telling myself, that this is like my reserve duty. Like I'm going there to improve the security, even in the short term. Then I wasn't radical because I wasn't questioning the basics. Well, I was against the occupation, but I wasn't against Zionism. I haven't realized yet that the problem doesn't stop within where the green line is. But I actually met a right-wing friend of my father's at the time, and he told me something very true. He told me, you left-wingers, you actually worsen the situation of the Arabs, because you give them a feeling that they're strong and that somebody cares about them, and then they don't fight, and then we keep screwing them up. This is how he said it. And there's something about it in this peace activism. It's a lot of it is made for just relaxing things, keeping them as they are in a more pleasant way. Okay, now I forgot what you wanted to say in the first place, but yeah, these are my thoughts.
He said about when people use the argument, what about the dead Israeli soldiers?
Yeah, so now I think about it in a more radical way.
Oh, just Israelis, you said.
Now I think about it not in the short term, but also in the long term. That I want to redefine the whole situation, to redefine what's the state between the river and the sea.
You asked about fear and how the relation to fear, and we are so conditioned to feel this fear from terror from Palestinians. It's amazing how even me, with my political opinions and my knowledge or whatever, I still feel that, and I'm still conditioned by how I grew up in Israel. A week ago, I was on train to Mano. I studied in Mano, yay. And there was a suspicious bag, and I couldn't recognize to who it belonged because it was too far away from everyone. And I actually went off the train. And I don't think a European would act like this unless they trumped up or something. But it's so conditioned, inside me, to react to it. I have anxiety issues, so I'm more prone to it. But it's really, it's something inside me. No matter how long I will live here, I'll still have it, I think.
I wish I could have answered that. No.
Okay.
No, you need to go.
Yes.
I don't disagree with what was said earlier, that the resolution of the situation is really up to people who live in Israel. However, there are some other influences that I think must be dealt with if the problem is going to be resolved. I mean, the U.S. gives about $4 billion in military aid to Israel every year. There are some high wealth individuals, U.S. citizens, who periodically appear and cause trouble in Israel. And there are some fanatical Christians who believe there has to be another war in Israel to usher in the judgment day so they can all go to heaven. I mean, how important are these influences?
That's an interesting, concrete question. Jonathan, maybe you have some.
Oh, okay. It's interesting now Christian Zionism was just being mentioned here. It's not just some. We're actually talking about dozens of millions of evangelical Christian Zionists. I think maybe about 60 million evangelicals, out of which probably about 20-something million subscribe to the, what is this eschatology of, Armageddon, and we need all the Jews to come to the Holy Land so that this will happen, and then those of them who will convert to Christianity will be saved, but the others will be burned in eternal fires of hell and so on. Yeah, there's
you
a lot.
laugh, but there seem to be a lot of them.
That's 40% of the voters in the U.S. are evangelical.
80 million.
So what's the challenge here?
Yeah, so we've got that. That's obviously a huge background. Now, speaking of Trump's declaration about Jerusalem, that's obviously a huge wooing and actually ratification of his election promise. Right? He promised it. He kind of chickened out in June, I think, on canceling that, on signing that he signed the waiver to not move the embassy, but now he did it. Now he says, okay, I delivered, right? That's a part of it. That's a huge part of it. And these Christian Zionists, they are actually the cousin of Ehud Barak. He's been actually leading that organization. So a Jew leading the Christian Zionists, you understand? And obviously Sheldon Adelson supporting the Republicans who are celebrating now on Jerusalem, and the international support to Netanyahu. I mean, Adelson, they had a little glitch recently, but Adelson has been, like, for a decade, I think, basically financing a propaganda paper for Netanyahu, Israel Hayom. It became the biggest daily. It surpassed Yediot Ahronot at a point because it's free and it just runs the line. So obviously there are enormous challenges, but I think that we should also be careful not to frame all of these problems just on the Republican and the right wing. This is why I make so much of an effort to also show how the left and the Democrats and so on are actually part of this problem.
Can I just say that I would like you to come down. No, not you. You. Can you come down here? And who has another question? Masih, can you come over here?
Yeah. My name is Jonas. I want to ask a question related to the other question about internal resistance versus like abroad ones. And I think it was a great question, but it kind of left out two nuances, I think. And one is, of course, the indigenous resistance from the Palestinians themselves, which of course is essential. But the other one I was wondering about was the racial hierarchies of the Jewish Israeli society itself, and kind of this, I discovered this political movement is in the 70s from the Mizrahi community, like this. I think it's a very Orientalist term, the Mizrahi, all these non-European Jews lumped together. And I was wondering, what is the potential for resistance from this community towards the white Zionist elite, towards bringing down the Zionist occupation and oppression?
We're all Ashkenazis, so
they don't know really.
Yeah,
you can ask me. I'm more like, Mr. Sousa, maybe. Yes, of course.
No, but it's a really good question, and I'm happy that somebody mentioned it. And when I was talking before about solidarity, this is exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah.
The Mizrahi struggle in Israel, and I mean, I wish it could be joined with the Palestinian. That would be amazing. But I think
it is happening.
Slowly, very slowly, yeah. But I think the question itself is way too complex and it would take hours to discuss this, so I don't know what to say now. It's way too big.
But the question
maybe
is...
you can...
just an anecdote and relating to Mr. Sousa here, who came from Baghdad. There are several prominent Baghdad Jews, like for example the late Naim Giladi or the author Sami Michael, who actually call themselves Arab Jews. And they note that they came from a Jewish society. 1/3 of Baghdad was a Jewish society, and it was there for centuries, and very, very integrated and very successful community. There was not Jew hatred in any substantial way there. But of course the establishment of the State of Israel brought frictions, not to mention the false flag terror that was committed by Zionists, as Naim Giladi and others account, in order to cause a flee to Israel.
This is a lie.
Okay, right.
Like your book, you read from Ilan Tucker.
There's several accounts of it. Okay, good. Now, and there is a group in Israel now that wants this to be investigated. In fact, this is very interesting. But
you
what I'm talking about,
take away his experience, at least, as you.
yes, what I'm talking about as Arab Jews, this was a notion. It's hardly possible to have this notion in Israel today, simply because, as I mentioned, Israel separates the Jew as a nationality from the Arab as a nationality. And this is why I think that it's a very, very big challenge whether the Mizrahi will ever really substantially challenge Zionism in such a way. What we see today, for example, Avi Gabai, who was elected to lead the Labour, he is from North African heritage, I think Morocco, if I'm not mistaken. And but he is taking the Labour to the right. He is running the right rhetoric, and he says he wants to woo the right. He wants to woo those Mizrahi voters, which traditionally voted right, as a kind of revenge to the Labour, who was so European, Ashkenazi, and now he's trying to change this, but look what is happening. The Labour is becoming the right.
Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if this is anything you can relate to, like being here with so many great Israeli activists, but from my personal experience and experiences of Palestinian friends, I feel like being in the West Bank, there's been a decrease in Israeli activists present within the West Bank in recent years, and an experience from the Palestinian community that there is a lack of that kind of like very direct support at the demonstrations, and like I know that other people have really great experiences with Jewish Voice of Peace and other communities or groups that have been very present within the West Bank, but also that there's like a general lack of activists coming from the Israeli society every Friday to all the protests, and that there is a Palestinian wish and hope for more of this. And where did this kind of activism go, or why is it I know that it's being very suppressed and very marginalized within the Israeli society, but
and prosecuted.
And definitely. So this, like, maybe you can give me some more insight on what are the major reasons for this kind of development that is very sad.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a different thing than the Jewish diaspora that you mentioned, but within Israel there's a real prosecution, there's no doubt about it. And I was in it also, like a subject of it. And even like our group, Ta'ayush, it was so much prosecuted. There were huge resources invested in this prosecuting. There were 2 moles inside Ta'ayush for 3 years, financed with equipment, recording equipment and everything, and the salaries for 2 moles to join it's an activity of like 12 people usually. It's like, usually what we do is accompany shepherds, but the state found the budget through a right-wing association called Adkan, but they got the budget from ועד מתיישבי השומרון, which gets budget from ביטוח לאומי, which is the social insurance. I pay for it. So we had these molds that we couldn't stand, but we just thought they were unbearable people, but we accepted them anyway because we can't afford to reject, when we get more than regular 12 people. And they recorded all sorts of things in the group, and also like there's the police and the army. They're not ashamed of just dragging the people into transgressions. I was in the car with one of the leaders of the group, Ezra, when this police officer was just chasing him on the road in a way that he just forced him to cross a white line, to make and then they could press charges against him, but then actually one of the soldiers testified. A soldier testified in his favor. It happens like that sometimes, that because the soldiers are regular people, then because there's a mandatory service, then some of them still maintain some normality. Me also, and then this person, Ezra, this activist, he actually got a lot of money from the state. It was very unique, but it was so blunt. And me also, I was like, it's ridiculous, the persecution of the police. I can tell about one day of activism when we went to Chavat Ma'on, it's an illegal outpost in the West Bank, where settlers are regularly throwing stones on children that are going to school. The army is accompanying the children regularly, and there's also Italian activists who help them, Operazione Colomba, they're a really nice organization. And this girl was hit by a stone in her eye, and her head was opened up, and she was 6 years old. So we went there to demonstrate near the outpost, and then the police said it's a military zone. Everybody who doesn't live here should leave immediately. And I said, well, check in their IDs because it doesn't say they live here. It's an illegal outpost. There's not such an address. So he wouldn't do that. He said, I wasn't told that. So I told him, he said, I'm just following orders. So I said, you know who said that? Did you read Eichmann in Jerusalem? So he didn't say anything. But later that day, we were in another illegal outpost documenting illegal building. And then one of the policemen said, you should get out, it's a military zone. So I got out, but he still arrested me. And then we were arrested many times for these things. And then in the police station, it turned out that the soldiers had a film of me during the arrest, and you could see that I'm out of the outpost. So then the police said, no, we actually arrested her for what she did in the morning. It's completely ridiculous because she insulted this officer by mentioning the name Eichmann. It's very insulting, and now she's charged for offending a public servant. And then, and I had charges, but they wouldn't. Then in the police station, one of the policemen started throwing chairs at me and said, it's too bad Eichmann didn't finish the job. And then because I told him I was going to complain about him, that's when they decided to press charges against me and go all the way. And then I moved to Denmark. So in Denmark, they kept like inviting me to this. Whenever I went to Israel, they invited. But then they realized that I actually moved and I got married. So, I'm not a danger anymore. They don't have to prosecute me. And they weren't ashamed to write in the court decision, we decided to drop the charges because she lives in Denmark. Like they don't even try to hide it. They just prosecute people, And it's happening all the time. So it explains part of why there's a decrease. People, if they go on trials all the time and they have to, people have to work for 6 months for the community and all these ridiculous things.
So the prosecution has become more like
also the laws themselves and
and the atmosphere
and everything.
The fascist way of thinking, I can see it in my family. The sanctions they put on me, that I can't go to a family trip because I'm criticizing the IDF on Facebook and their kids are in the IDF. So it just hurts them too much, and they think it's legitimate to tell me it's like they don't, and they're like they're considered themselves pretty radical, Zionist left, but they don't realize how fascist they become.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have to run really fast.
I have one small question.
But can I say that we really need to show the have to leave. I have to leave. People are getting tired.
Skal vi slå spørgsmålet sammen?
Jeg har bare et lille spørgsmål.
3 questions in a row.
Can you find a nationalist Israeli that isn't a Zionist?
That's one question. Can you find an Israeli who's not a Zionist? Yes.
No, a national.
Israeli who is not a Zionist.
Yes, and my question is a bit in relation to the first question of compromise, maybe of rebranding Zionism, if you could call it that. Jonathan, you said that the political paradigm is conditioned on Zionism in Israel. So my question is, in my understanding, Asher Ginsberg and Ahad Ham, I think the Hebrew name was, a promoter of this kind of moral Zionism or cultural Zionism, if you could call it that. How is that, and how come that is not an option in the struggle? And if it is it a potential for rebranding the whole political paradigm?
Yeah, just a small comment to the young lady over there with a problem with Hebrew speaking. I think no matter if you're German, American, Arabic, whatever, if you're a Nazi, you're a Nazi. It's the same. If you're Iraqi, if you're Jewish, if you're Danish, if you're American evangelical, if you're Zionist, it doesn't matter what language you speak. That could be a pointer. I mean, it's the ideology, not the language of the people. And that leads me to, how do we unveil Zionism? Because it's eating up Judaism, it's making Israel more and more fascistic, it's everywhere in the US. That's the spearhead of it.
Okay. 3 questions, so we'll take you about 2 or 3 days.
I can say the last question. Yeah, okay. No, I'd like to answer to all those 3 kind of succinctly as I can. If there's any Israeli national that is not Zionist, well, I think Israeli nationalism is basically Zionism. And the question about Hada'am and the cultural Zionism, I would say that, before, there have been movements for so-called binational Zionism, like Shomer Tza'ir and Brit Shalom, but those movements had they had some political power before Israel was established. But when Israel was established, Ben-Gurion simply kicked that kind of Zionism out. The mainstream Zionism became the Zionism that ethnically cleanses as an ideology. This is the ethnic cleansing is now a part of this Zionism. I would say across the spectrum. You will not find Zionists that will accept the right of return, for example. This needs to be maintained. I would say that whilst there are arguments, like Noam Chomsky argues that, his kind of Zionism would not be called Zionism anymore, I would say we need to look at the reality of what Zionism is today. And what it is basically saying is maintain the Jewish majority demography. That is the modus operandi of it. And for me, that says the only way you can maintain it is either by ethnic cleansing or by when you control people and you don't want to have them in the polity, you apply apartheid. So, as far as I can see, that's the actual reality of it. Yeah.
I can address the last one. I think, and I've been thinking this for like a very long time. I think Israel must be exposed as a not a democracy. Not in my eyes, but like in general in the community. And I think if we achieve that, then Zionism will be unveiled, and that will be the way to also expose Zionism. That's my opinion. But it's very hard. It is.
Okay. That was a clever final remark in a way. And ladies and gentlemen, across opinions, experiences, national identities, ethnic minority identity, whatever skin color we have, please let's try to talk together in a gentle way and respect each other and try to see if we can find common ground. I want to thank you, Masih, for inviting all of us, and especially I want to thank you for me moderating this. It's a little complicated, I want to say. I find myself in a vulnerable position. It's not easy to feel the energy of the audiences and the different perspectives and addressing kind of, provocative questions somehow, and to also embrace all of you and your experiences, and so I want to thank all of us for staying around, and thank you for addressing this complex world in such a nice and polite way. So thank you. Give them a hand and give the audience